It can seem like all of this information about environmental issues and climate change is all bad news. But it's not all bad. Certainly, we have a lot of progress that needs to be made, but there's some good news out there as well. And so this lecture is all about good environmental news. So while a lot of the problems that we're going to be talking about are still a problem, such as pollution, there have been some major changes that have improved the environment over the past few decades. So during the previous administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, the Clean Water Act, and the Clean Air Act were all kind of had the legs knocked out from under them. It was hard for them to do their jobs, what they were intended to do originally. But the current administration has restored power to these various environmental organizations and regulations. And there's a push to improve infrastructure across the United States, including things like leaking natural gas lines and leaking sewer pipes. So the story that's represented on the slides here is the story of the Cuyahoga River. In the 1960s, the Cuyahoga River was heavily polluted. I mean, you can see the pollution in the image on the left. It caught fire multiple times. In fact, a lot of rivers in the United States were catching fire in the 1960s because of pollution. These rivers catching fire caused Congress to pass the Clean Water Act of 1972, which required cleaning up America's rivers and putting less pollution into them. And now the Cuyahoga River is one of the cleanest urban rivers in the country. The organization called American Rivers called it their River of the Year for 2019. We can also see things going on at the state level. States often lead the country in progressive and environmental reforms. In California, for example, that state is banning gas-powered leaf blowers and gas-powered lawnmowers starting in 2024. California is a really big state. It's home to 39.5 million people. That's 12% of the entire US population. It's also an economic powerhouse. If it was a country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world. California has often led the nation in things like improved gas mileage. And now, hopefully, this gas-powered lawn equipment ban. I hate leaf blowers, don't you? The state of New Jersey has passed a law requiring all lead pipes in their water system be replaced. Lead pipes are what led to the Flint, Michigan water crisis. There have been charges brought about the Flint, Michigan issue. They're still being brought against people who made the decisions that led to the crisis and that tried to cover things up. And while there are still problematic sources of lead that are getting lead into the drinking water in areas of Flint, thousands of lead pipe runs have been replaced. and the water system has changed to reduce the likelihood that lead from the pipes will end up in the water. Oil and gas, they're hugely polluting. They're a huge source of climate change emissions. But there's good news on this front, too. Boston has a new mayor, Michelle Wu, and she ran on what's called a Green New Deal platform. So a Green New Deal platform is clean energy, green energy, renewable energy, improved public transit. She talked about planting more urban trees, which can help with the local air quality. But it's also a lot of climate justice. Good, well-paying jobs are part of the Green New Deal. It's not just cleaning up the environment, it's cleaning up a lot of the problems in our society. There are 8 states that have now pledged to convert to renewable energy, 100% renewable energy within the next few years. Coal production is in decline. Coal plants are a major source of pollution. They put mercury into the atmosphere. They release greenhouse gases that increase climate change. China is one of the biggest coal users, but in the past 7 years, 75% of the planned new coal plants have been canceled. And China has pledged to stop building new coal plants in countries outside of themselves. It's a step in the right direction. The Biden administration has reversed permits for new oil and gas extraction in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This is a very fragile habitat that's under a lot of stress from climate change. And an oil spill in the Arctic, if it happened in the winter, it would be nearly impossible to do anything about it. This administration has also banned large-scale old-growth timber harvesting, cutting down these old forests. It stopped planned road construction in protected wilderness area. And it has revoked the permit for the last part of the Keystone XL pipeline. This is an example of climate justice. The pipeline that has been basically defeated because they can't build the last leg of it, would have run through a bunch of Native American territories against the will of the tribes and their governments. They didn't want it. They fought against it, and now it's been stopped. Going to the Netherlands, Shell Oil is incorporated in the Netherlands. That's where they're based. And the government of the Netherlands has ordered Shell to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 45% before the end of 2030. So that's really a fast regulation. A lot of times these things will say, oh, in the next 20 years, and then, 20 years, it might be, too little too late. But this is coming up fast. Now, it's unclear how they're going to be able to enforce this since Shell is a worldwide company, but it's a step in the right direction, and it will hopefully inspire other countries to follow along and do the same sorts of measures. And there is a group of environmental activists who managed to fill 3 positions out of 12 on the board of directors for the oil giant ExxonMobil. So now there's going to be some people speaking for the environment on the board. It's going to make it harder for them to do these what should be controversial new development projects. The EPA is also finalizing new rules to reduce the production of super polluting chemicals by 85% in the next 15 years. Super polluting chemicals are things that stay in the environment for long periods of time, decades or even longer. These can often bioaccumulate or biomagnify through the food chain. Mercury does this. That's why pregnant women aren't supposed to eat a lot of fish. But one of the best environmental stories is the ban on one of these super polluting chemicals, DDT. DDT is a pesticide that was first developed in the 1940s. There was a lot of, as you can see, propaganda around the DDT, and they were not just using it on like farms. As you can see on the picture on the right-hand side, that's a beach in Los Angeles where they were spraying pesticides, and they were spraying them right across the people who were on the beach. Well, DDT, not surprisingly, is not good for you. And it's a carcinogen that can affect the person exposed, and if that person is a pregnant woman, it can affect her daughter and her granddaughter. It's complicated why it can go for multiple generations like that, but it has been banned. Now, DDT is not just about cancer, it's also about malaria. DDT was very important for the eradication of malaria in the United States and in large portions of Europe, across Russia, in Australia. A lot of the places that are kind of yellow and orange on this map used to have malaria, but it's been eliminated from these places. The only places it's still occurring, and actually, even a lot of the places that are marked as purple on this map have gotten rid of malaria since this map was made. And you're going, I can hear you. There was malaria in the United States? Oh, hell yes, there was. There was malaria in Massachusetts. Malaria was a major, major problem wherever it occurs. It's a huge health issue. And DDT was part of reducing its range. Unfortunately, DDT persists in the environment. It was developed in the 1940s, and by the 1950s, there were early signs that there were some problems going on. In particular, we started to see major declines in bird populations. And the bald eagle was nearly wiped out from the lower 48 states. DDT was banned in 1972. As you can see from this image at the bottom, the population of bald eagles and the number of nesting pairs has gone up really dramatically and relatively quickly since DDT was banned in 1972. And the last good news story is the ozone hole. And this one's good because the whole planet came together very, very quickly after the ozone hole was discovered. Okay, so what is the ozone hole? Well, there is a layer high up in the atmosphere called the ozone layer, and it prevents a lot of ultraviolet radiation from reaching the surface. You can see this image here. It blocks basically all of the UVC, most of the UVB. It doesn't do much for the UVA type radiation. UVC and UVB are the more harmful forms of UV radiation. They cause a lot of cancer cases. In 1982, it was observed that areas around the North and South Pole had thinned. This ozone layer had thinned. And there were areas where it basically wasn't there anymore. These areas were called ozone holes. The thinning of this protective layer was caused by ozone depleting substances. These are chemicals used in everything from air conditioning and refrigeration to hairspray. And you guys know in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of hairspray use. 7 years after the discovery of the ozone hole, the world came together and banned ozone depleting chemicals. 7 years. Wow. In 2019, the last year I found data for, the ozone hole was the smallest it has been since it was discovered. So we're doing better than we were doing in 1982 as far as the ozone layer is concerned. Wow. Wouldn't it be nice if we could solve climate change that quickly? Anyway, that's the good news. Hopefully you'll be inspired that change can happen, that we can solve a lot of these problems out there. And you can go out and, do your part, whatever your part may be, whatever you have the time, the money, and the energy to do. Okay, that is it.